Hey, welcome to the Bracketville podcast number 3. Tim Kruger, along with Dave Allman. Dave, how are you?
I am well, Tim. How are you this evening?
You getting plenty of sleep and energy to head into this stretch run here?
Well, I'm getting adequate sleep, Tim. We'll leave it
All
at
right,
that.
yeah, me too.
The
I think I
best
woke up
the
this
next
morning at
best really
3:45.
good deep sleep will either be the accidental nap in the afternoon, or it'll be the Monday after we get the bracket that night and the brain turns off for a couple days.
All right, well, we thought since the bubble has changed quite a bit here in the last week, we thought we'd just jump into the bubble today and narrow it down to that. Now we're taping this Monday afternoon, so our brackets will come out tomorrow and by noon, and so you'll see what we've eventually came up with, and I think most of it will be discussed here. And then just kind of give you guys a rundown. We're gonna go. Let's see. So yes, we'll have the regular Friday bracket, and then we're gonna go Monday, Wednesday, correct?
Yes.
Or we're going Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, right?
Yep.
So we will have 5 brackets next week. The Monday one will kind of just recap the weekend. Wednesday, we'll kind of get some automatic qualifiers in there, and I believe isn't the WCC on Tuesday night? I believe it is.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
so
and I
we'll
think
have
the
that
other thing.
winner. We'll have that winner included, and then and we'll have some very well. I don't even know. Is there any big time leagues? Well, I guess the ACC would probably have some games on
Yeah.
Tuesday.
Well, it'll also give us a chance, we've been doing this a long time, so it kinda gives you that final chance between Monday and Wednesday coming off of a last busy weekend. If you need to
Right.
do a seedless scrub between Monday and then Wednesday kind of, to be honest with you, in our experience, sets us up for basically pretty much what the final bracket's gonna look like minus the AQs and adjustments we have to make and maybe a result or here through Friday.
Yeah.
But once we get to Friday,
Yeah. Friday's bracket will probably be it's
pretty
close to
close.
the yeah, pretty close. We might make a little adjustment here and there. There might be, and the other thing too is you can be debating between a last 2 seed and the first 3 seed and back and forth, and the metrics could change depending on what's happened with a whole bunch of other games. So
Right.
you kind of look at that a little bit, but we know the committee doesn't really they look at it. They get very frosty if you tell them that they don't look at it. But past history would say they don't make a lot of big changes.
No, and again, where those tend to be, if any, are what you just said. If they're in a situation where 2 teams are real close to each other and one is 8 and one is 9, or one is, 20 and 21, where you get a seed line break.
Right. And
There's
let's
not at that point debating 22 and 23 when you're both ending up in the same spot's really not gonna accomplish a whole lot.
yes, and I think we should mention that this is a good point before we jump into the bubble. Little committee room 101 training here. In that scenario that you just mentioned, Dave, there's, you think of putting out a team the last 3 or the first 4. There may have been a very loud voice in the room who had a strong opinion, and that team ended up the first 4, number 1 4 seed. And he may come back on the scrub and say, all right, look, I want to lay this out again. And he may sway some people with a very close vote. And then that's where it may switch. So that thing can happen, no doubt. I don't think the loud voice is talked about enough. And the other thing, too, that a past committee member just mentioned to me about a week or two ago, and it was a great point, was, they used to have 10. And when they added the 12th, he really felt strongly that that was like probably not the best because you and I know we can knock it out pretty easy if it's just us 2, right? You get 6 guys, now you got, you know, all kinds of opinions that other teams added into that bucket. And, you add 12 and now, so all right, here we go. So I'm just gonna rattle off kind of like my last 4 quote unquote buys. And now I'm not including Miami of Ohio or St. Louis, who are automatics at this point. They may be at some point in at large. And it would be a perfect opportunity for them to be an at large right now because there's some room here. My basic basic teams that I have out in not any particular order. My last 4 or 5 in, so to speak, before I get to the last 4 in, are UCLA, SMU, A&M, TCU, and Missouri, with Missouri being the probably the best in right now, the safest in.
Yeah, and I think we're pretty close there, Tim. You know, the way my seed list is looking now for the bracket tomorrow, sort of, my last 4 buys, if you will, would be SMU, Texas A&M, UCLA, and TCU.
Okay, we're pretty close.
And
Well,
then
yeah, and
I
I
would I
like I
would have
said, Missouri's
Missouri.
mine, like, probably
Yeah, and then
just
I
on
would
the edge.
have.
They were in that group, and now they've kinda jumped out of it.
Yeah. And so Missouri jumped up a couple for me again. I think just their combination of their resume metrics continuing to improve along
Yes,
with the quality
that's the big
side
one
and
for
just
me.
the number of wins that they put together. I think Missouri at this point is much more likely to end up in the field. It would take some of their own doing and probably a little help to fall out at this point. So I have them a spot ahead of Iowa and NC State.
Oh, wow, okay.
Um, but again, I don't know that to me, sort of like Iowa and NC State are probably going to be fine. Um, it's just that it's been a little bit questionable down the stretch here, and they both took a loss that wasn't particularly good over the weekend, and that allowed a couple of other teams because those teams get bunched, and so it doesn't take a whole lot to move 3 or 4 spots when you got teams that look
Right,
identical. So
and
again, I
then
think those teams are probably going to end up being fine, but they have brought a little bit into question if they stumble again down the stretch, exit early, and then you sit around waiting to see what's going to happen next
yeah.
week with automatic qualifiers, and all of a sudden the bubble starts shrinking and you end up and thought you were safe, and now you're like right in that conversation.
Yeah, and a couple of them are and I think we should just spend 2 minutes on them. SMU's at 36 in the net, but their SOR and WOB and their BV rankings have been pretty steady throughout the whole year and pretty good throughout the whole year, which kept them in. They've now dropped to 44 SOR and 43 WOB. So, that's kind of on the edge. They're probably gonna get in, like you said, but boy, getting swept on the West Coast did not help them.
No, and again, I had on our building the field that I put together where it's kind of the countdown of who's in and who's out, kind of where it stands. If SMU had just taken care of their business in the Bay Area, even if not impressively, just won those 2 games,
Or
I
split. They
even
just split.
split would have been okay, but, win them both, they probably could have just wrapped up a bid and it would be
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
cruising on in for a seed. But by not
Absolutely.
splitting and losing both, again, they're probably gonna end up fine, but you now bring in 2 scenarios of what if you lose another 2? You start that margin that you have to play with starts getting smaller, as you get a little bit further down that list. So again, I think you and I are both in agreement. They're probably going to end up okay, but
Yeah,
now there's a little more question if some other teams behind them catch fire and they stand still or they drop another spot or 2.
yeah, and I just 1 30-second point of Missouri. I mean, for me, they were always iffy. Uh, their predictors were not very good, and they were always iffy for me, and their other metrics were okay, but they really took a leap in in, in their, resume metrics when they beat Vanderbilt, Tennessee, and A&M, like, within about 10 days. And one of those was on the road. I mean, that and then playing Arkansas didn't hurt them, that just almost helped their situation. So, that's where they sit. Alright, so, yeah, I wanna mention one more team that's just I I'm always they keep sinking, like, in the net. They have a really good resume, though, that's kinda keeping them afloat, and they also have some, like I said, some really good wins, but they have some things on their resume. I would just wanna get your opinion, and we're gonna do, like I said, one pod where we cover the middle because we really haven't talked much about that, and I think we should. But that's Central Florida. Um, their numbers are outstanding. They're they're 31-29. They're not gonna get left out with a 29 WAP. They just aren't,
No,
and they're gonna get a probably a decent seed. But their predictives are terrible. Ken Palm is 48. T rank is 47. I think they're 46 in the net.
something like that.
Um, so their seed could take a hit.
They're
I
one
don't
of
know.
those teams.
You could go way any way with it.
Yeah, and that's what I was gonna say. I think there's always a few teams every year that kinda trying to figure out how a group of people on the committee is going to handle resumes that don't align sort of across the metric board, where things just don't add up. And this is where you have to start asking, do they start getting heavier and start leaning on, well, do we trust what we see on the results more from a seeding standpoint, or do we trust the metrics more on what they might be telling us on a larger picture about a team? And that's where we don't really know, how they're going to do that. We're trying to tell you what we think our best guess is. What I do think helps them more than anything, though, potentially, is the fact that they got that win at BYU,
Yes.
because it's a significant, noteworthy road win beyond what they had at Texas A&M.
Yeah.
Kind of back up the fact that they had two really big home wins against Texas Tech and Kansas.
Now that win at BYU, the committee may say, well, that's when BYU had Saunders was out and they were hitting their slide. You know,
Right.
they could argue that.
I think the other thing that has hindered UCF too is the fact that while they have some of those really big wins, they don't have what you would truly call a bad loss, but they do have potentially 4 losses against teams that are not
Yes.
likely to make the field at this point. In which case, does that impact their seeding? And I kind of keep going back on forth. For now, I'm holding them because of their wins and that big win at BYU and the road win at A&M right at the back end of the 7 line. But I'm also waiting to see if they're going to get passed by somebody. Because like
Yeah.
there's teams right there like the Villanovas of the world. Um, I'm not sure how they're going to handle Utah State for the same reason. They're solid, but they don't have exceptional metrics. St. Louis has been fairly consistent all year, but they don't really have a big win. And so it's kind of like who you're going to bump. So this is where a team that's, like a Clemson, if they turn it around, a
Yeah.
Georgia, one of those other conference gets 2 or 3 more big wins, UCF could then fall a couple of
Yeah.
seed lines and end
I
up
would have
right
I would
along
have
that
probably
9-10 line.
when I was kinda just, taking a group of teams in that area and kinda just shuffling them around, and I had UCF way down the bottom. When I got all done, I had nobody else to go in that 7. I mean, they kinda got there by default, really, because if you wanna average their metrics, you would go 12 seed, 8 seed, it would be a 10 seed, you know? And the other thing, and, I know the committee doesn't look at it as much as they used to, but back in the day, way back in the day, Dave, when we started doing this with pencil and paper,
Now, Tim, I still
they have
Tim, you
2
wanna see?
games.
I still got my pencil and paper.
They have 2 games, non-conference games in the top 2 quadrants. They have none, not that's it, and they've only won 1 of those. So, yeah, that's, uh, that's a little scary.
Yeah,
And the one team
there's
they beat was
always a
A&M,
couple
a
of
team that
there's always a couple of teams every year that are just a little odd,
yeah,
and you're kinda
and this is
taking
one
your
of them.
best guess, to be honest with you, on how the committee's gonna handle it.
Yeah, and I think just again, a little Bracketology 101. Not all you can't just, I hear people I see people on social media a lot of times go, "Oh, well, but they're 12-4 against Q1 and 2." All wins are not the same. And here's a perfect example of Central Florida. Like they've got wins against 102, 123, 73, 78. Those are all quad 2 wins, but those are teams that aren't near the field. So, but it is what it is. All right, let's move on. Last 4 in. Who you get your last 4 in? I think you and I are pretty close here.
Yeah, it's again, a little bit of this is by default, but I've got Ohio State at the top of that list, followed by New Mexico, Santa Clara, and VCU, largely based on just the overall cleanliness of their resume. Um, and then, the other teams, San Diego State, Virginia Tech, and were pretty much the other two in that conversation. And I wouldn't have you know, not would be upset if somebody else had a different opinion on that. But I
Yeah,
think right now, for me, if you just look at the metrics across the board, VCU would win. And then I think they've just been a little cleaner, and they also have that win against Virginia Tech. Um, I think where VCU is going to potentially get in trouble down the road is, well, they obviously have to win their last two games. Um, Either one of those
yeah,
would not be a good loss. And then if they were to lose again to St. Louis and go 0-3 against the league leader without at that point, no victory potentially against quad one, it, it could be an awful hard
yeah,
sell for VCU to end up on the right side. Plus, we always anticipate that we're going to lose probably a couple of spots. And so if you're one of those very last two in right now, you need to get some work done and try to get yourself 2 or 3 spots above that to feel a little safer.
yeah. And here's what kills them too. And I'm going to throw Indiana in this mix too with San Diego State. They've got games that are going to jump them if they win those games coming up. San Diego State, especially in the Mountain West tournament. Indiana's got a big game next week. Um, and this week, I'm sorry. And they get the Big Ten tournament. They could rattle off, a couple wins against some lower teams and then upset somebody, and all of a sudden, you know, they're kind of in the mix, especially if you're kind of looking to replace VCU, um, that could be the problem there. I have the exact same four. I just have Ohio State and Santa Clara flip flop, so they're like my furthest in, but they are not safe by any means. Um, I would love for
Yeah,
them to win either Gonzaga or St. Mary, one of those two. I think. Well,
yeah,
they'll play St. Mary's again. Yeah,
yeah, I
they
think the
they
hard
they get.
part. Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, Tim. The hard part that Santa Clara is gonna have is a little bit the VCU, where if they lose to Santa Clara again, then you basically lost to Gonzaga twice, St. Mary's twice, you beat St. Mary's once at home. You have that quad 4 loss. As much as I really like Santa Clara's team, I think that becomes, if you go basically 1-4 against the top of your league, it's hard to convince people out of the West Coast Conference that you should potentially be in. But so much of this is who else is around when you get there? Who
Yeah,
else are you being compared to? And then do we lose a couple?
yeah.
Um,
They
because
lost a
that's
nail biter to St. Louis way back when that really would have helped them.
yeah.
They did get clobbered by New Mexico. They did beat Minnesota, who's playing better now, and they did beat, a run of the mill Xavier team. But if you look at like who they tried to schedule, they did pretty well. Now, what killed them was, beating a Nevada or McNeese State. That would have helped out a lot,
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah, they're kind of in the book. They've got, to me, they've got something that VCU doesn't have, and that's a top 25 win, you know?
Right.
Right
No,
or
that's
wrong or
true,
indifferent or home or away, they got it.
which is why when I was making this list for tomorrow, Santa Clara was a better bet than VCU, and then it just kinda came down to, those other 3 in that order.
Yeah.
Um, I think for
Uh,
Ohio State, if
yeah,
they take care of business this week and then they close with a win against Indiana, with the metrics they're probably going to have, unless they just bomb and look really bad or lose really early at the Big Ten tournament, I think the metrics are probably going to pull Ohio State into the field unless we really get scrunched.
and, you know, you hate to
If they beat Indiana this weekend at home.
yeah, yeah, and you know Indiana's gonna win that game and mess it all up. You know that, right? You know that. Um,
Well, I don't know that, but I'll take your word for it. When we're doing our pod next week, I'll try to remember.
um, yeah, and I know you had them in once or twice in the bracket. I did not at any point have them in. They were just always on my edge. They were very similar to Vatek, who sat there all year long, right in that first 4 out, and just every time they had a chance to get that win, they couldn't get it. But that win, obviously, over Purdue, um, was one that did it for me, and I had and the deal is, they're sitting at 39-37 in SOR and WAB, and they're 34 in the net, so that's
I mean,
35
it's
KenPom,
not
man.
there's
That's
nothing
gonna be tough to
lockish
knock
about
them
that.
out.
It's not lockish of that, but again, if they beat Indiana, if they take care of business this last week, they're gonna be in a pretty good position to not get left out purely on numbers at that point.
Right. I mean, you take those 4, there's nobody else that's in this bubblish area that has 4 numbers like that. There
Right.
just
Well,
isn't.
and the other thing is, it's a little bit like the Carolina team last year, except maybe a little better. I don't remember Carolina's
Yeah,
all their
very very
stuff up,
similar very similar. They just barely at the end of the year, they think they got 1 quad 1 and
but, that's the thing. I think that if we learned anything last year, that and this was the differentiation for me earlier when we talked about Ohio State and Indiana before, is that even before this past weekend, is that while Ohio State's 2-10 is very ugly against quad 1, they are 6-1 against quad 2, and then their metric numbers across the board, um, are solid.
yeah.
They certainly have work to do to finish this thing off, but I think sometimes we forget, that they did beat Wisconsin, they did beat UCLA. Yes, those games were home, so UCLA can help them by doing their part, you
Yes.
know, um, et cetera. It would also have helped Ohio State if they didn't have that, loss to Pitt on their resume, but that's
Pitt's
why I've
the,
got them in the first 4. They've
Pitt's the
gotta finish
resume
this off.
killer this year. They killed Cal over the weekend. I would have bet Cal would have been in the field had they beaten Pitt
Well, I
for
I
me.
had Cal in my field
Yeah,
last Friday, and then,
yeah.
so
Yeah,
much
so
for
we kinda
that.
covered Indiana. Very, very similar. The difference there, though, Dave pointed it out, we talked about the great numbers that, Ohio State had. They're sitting there at WABA 48 and or WABA 50 and SOR at 48, Ken Palm 43. I mean, that's tough to
Well,
overcome right now.
what's happened is for a long time, eh, Indiana had a really tough schedule. A lot of their hardest conference games were on the road, so you've gotta account for that. It was a very difficult schedule for them. But I think ultimately what always kept me the trouble I had is that, like, if you put the first 2 quads together, Ohio State at least had, like, 6 to 7 wins,
Mhm.
and 8 where as we sit here today, Indiana, I believe, has 4 against
Yes.
the first 2 quadrants,
4 and 12.
4 and 12. I mean, if all 4 of those wins were quad 1A, it would maybe look a little bit different, but that's to me, that's just a tough sell to say you're 4 and 12 when you've had that many shots at it. And then most of their and then the other thing that hurt them, quite frankly, is again, it's not all their fault, but sometimes these things just happen. But, Kansas State and Marquette falling apart and not being both being over 100 in the net. Basically, Indiana also has just 4 wins against the top 100. So
Yeah,
now that their metrics have slid a little bit and they really only have 1 win of note away from home, and that's that last second win at UCLA. Um, their only other 2 road wins this year are Maryland and Rutgers.
yeah,
It's just getting to be a tougher and tougher sell,
yeah,
um,
no doubt.
to see them have a way. I mean, at this point, they have to beat Minnesota and Ohio State and probably win a game or 2 at the Big Ten tournament to feel like they are potentially looking good again.
Yeah. All right, we got 2 more points. The first one is gonna be a couple of Big 12 teams that have risen up on the periphery a little bit, and then we're gonna talk about the big elephant in the room. Uh, West Virginia and Cincinnati. Now, had Cincinnati gone into Texas Tech and won, we'd be having a different conversation, obviously. Do you see any path that they can?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I mean, Cincinnati has come on and they're playing a lot better. Um is the way I would put it this way: if they finish off their business this week, they will be on the discussion board, or, on that what we like to call the under consideration board when the committee gets there next week. Whether or not they can make a move up of that, closer to the field, is going to depend on what happens around them and then what they can do at the Big 12 tournament. Because, this is the problem that, Cincinnati's resume numbers just aren't even close. So, and they have 13 losses. They're 16 and 13.
Right.
Their best
They can't afford
non-conference
another
their
loss.
best non-conference win is Dayton at home. All of their other non-conference wins are quad 4, and they have the loss to Eastern Michigan.
Yep.
So, basically, they're relying on a really good home win against Iowa State and a road win at Kansas, which was unbelievable. So you give them all the credit in the world, but they're just trying to make up so much ground
Yeah.
that it's just and they're 2 and 7 on the road. It's just a hard climb when you already have 13 losses. So,
And West Virginia is pretty much the same. I mean, Cincinnati's SOR and WAB are 66. Now their predictives are a little better, but, West Virginia, even though they've got a couple nice wins, um, their SOR is 63, their WAB 60, their KenPom's 59. I mean, that just screams you're
yeah.
out.
Yeah, both of these
And
teams
net
have
is
work to
58.
do.
I mean, it's just yeah, it's just not gonna happen. Yeah, I
Right
don't
now, I mean, I have
even
West
if they
Virginia
ran
1.
the table and lost in the finals, I don't think
Yeah, I mean, again, this goes back to the whole season counts.
yes.
And when you got nothing accomplished in November and December and even into mid-January, it's very difficult to make up a tournament resume in a month or a month and a half.
They have 1 non-conference quad 3 win, that was Pittsburgh. Everything else was quad 4.
Yeah. The only other thing that I can say is, if you're putting those 2 right next to each other, I have West Virginia 1 spot ahead simply because they're, 1 more win, and then they do have the sweep of Cincinnati. So,
Yeah, yeah,
it again, head to head doesn't usually matter that much, but if I got them side by side and West Virginia beat them twice, then I'm gonna have them 1 spot ahead.
yeah.
But again,
Alright.
both of those teams got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I really don't think there's a chance. We talked about USC a little bit off the air, and they're kind of in the same boat. Alright. The big elephant in the room is Auburn. Um, and I think I mentioned this, I think, on our last podcast was, you know, there comes a time when you have to kinda look and project when they get this many losses, you have to take a look and say, "Okay, they're at 14 losses. Um, no team's gotten in with 16. 15, some teams have gotten in. Couple of things they've had to have. Number 1, they've had to have a tremendous non-conference or a tremendous strength of schedule, and Auburn has that.
Mhm.
Number 2, they have to have some big wins. Auburn's had that. But they have to compile some victories, and if you remember, I think was it Vanderbilt was like 19 and 15? There was a little bit of a 4-game gap in there, you're like, "Okay, they won 19 times." Um, they're not there, and they'd have to go a long way to get there.
Yeah. I mean, we've had a couple of teams in the history, Georgia, I think maybe Villanova one year, Michigan a couple of years ago was 17 and 14.
I think
But
way, way, way back in the day, I think Louisville was 16 and 14, but we're talking 30 years ago.
yeah, but anyway, the point is, once there was a time when 14 had been the most, and then it got moved to 15, but the number of at-large teams that get in with 15 losses is rare.
Yes.
You have to have some special things, and Auburn has a couple of those, but I don't know. But this is the thing. If you look at what they have left, they've got LSU at home, which pretty much becomes a must win. Really, Ole Miss should have been a must win too. That's why they're really in this predicament. But now, because if you fall to LSU at home, even if you beat Alabama on the road, you're still back to one game over 500, which is not going to, no team's ever made it in one game over 500 either.
Right. As an
So,
at-large. Yeah.
right, as an at large. So, you know, the, they're basically at this point, their best chance is to win out. I mean, you got to beat LSU, then you got to go find a way to win at Auburn, or I mean, at Alabama, your rival, who's, anything can happen in those games, but Alabama's playing awful well right now. So if you get there, then you've got a chance to still finish with 15 losses and maybe get to like 18 or 19 wins. And then I think Auburn would have a pretty good case with all the other things you mentioned. But if
Yeah.
they, but
That would give them 18, and then they could win 1, and that would give them 19, 19, 15.
so
I would
they're not
probably put them
dead.
in myself.
But here's the thing, right? With everything else, and particularly this year's bubble,
Yeah.
but so the caveat is though they've got to win these next two games because even if you beat LSU and you lose at Alabama, now you're at 15 losses going into the SEC tournament, which means you're going to get 16 if you don't win the whole thing. In which case, then you're an automatic qualifier, so it doesn't matter anyway.
Right. Right.
So, I mean, they're not dead; they've got a path, but it's by losing to Ole Miss at home, it takes away that margin in the Alabama game, and now you pretty much are gonna have to go up there and win.
Right. Because 'cause they've got 2 wins away from home against Florida and St. John's.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean,
The
nobody's
problem is the
questioning.
problem is they only won 2 games, two true road games all year.
Well, and this is the problem. It becomes a math ratio problem after a while. That it's not that they haven't won enough to deserve, it's not their strength of schedule, it's none of that. It's they're just, 500 teams, even in this era, don't get to the tournament as at larges.
Yeah. And, it's maybe why too, I know some people, I know, when you were on your, by the way, when are you guys doing your mock? Are you doing that this weekend?
Yeah, it's Thursday through Sunday.
Okay. So those will be taped and then put out, right?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So look for that. Okay. Um, but we talk a lot about, I think, Rocco, our buddy on the first, on the, reveal talked about it on the mock selection was that, the heavy reliance on the numbers, he goes, there should be more nuance and looking at the resume and so forth. It so I don't like to get too much into that, but again, like I told Dave earlier, I've been killed so many times as being an old school guy, liking looking at the resume, right? But even Auburn, and maybe this is why they look at the numbers. Auburn has a 45 SOR and a 47 WOB. Well, according to what like they did last year, that was troublesome.
Yeah.
Forget the record. I mean, we're talking the record's going to be the problem, and that's 100% correct. I'm just saying you throw that out there, and that's there too. So anyway, yeah, there is a path, but boy, pretty narrow, pretty narrow. Okay, any final words? Anybody we should look at? I mean, I we don't. I think we're pretty safe this year to see somebody come out of the pack and go crazy. I, although I don't know. They're too far back now, but I would say Cal would be that one team, but they're just too far out.
Yeah, I mean, the the
I
the
think
the
San Diego
problem.
State's probably the one that's probably the
Yeah, San
most
Diego State
likely
could
to
could probably make a run and get that at-large bid.
without a lot of problem. You know what I mean? They don't have to go crazy. They just need to win
I
a
mean,
few games.
they could beat New Mexico on a neutral court, beat Boise, get a couple more decent wins, and then lose a close game to USU and still be in the conversation. Now, whether that's enough or not will depend on what happens. I think the
Right.
really bigger questions, Tim, and as we get ready to go into championship week with conference tournament starting the next week, is how many spots do we lose if we lose any, and who are those? For example, Miami of Ohio wins their last 2 games this week, finishes unbeaten.
Yep.
I think the general consensus is, and probably rightly so, is that if they were to lose in their conference tournament, particularly like, to say, Akron or something, that Miami of
They'd be
Ohio
in.
would get an at-large bid. I think the optics would look very bad for a team to go literally unbeaten in the regular season and lose 1 game
I
in their
don't
conference
remember
tournament.
I don't remember, I don't remember Wichita's non-conference that year, but they were undefeated, and they got in. They lost in the NCAA tournament, but that was a discussion leading in. What if they lose in the Valley tournament? And for the most part, people said they're gonna be in,
Yeah.
you know? And I think they ended
So
up getting like an 8
so
seed or
that's one
something,
of
so
those things to watch. So, if I'm a bubble team,
yeah.
I am watching the A10 to see whether, like, VCU or somebody else comes up to grab a 2nd spot. I'm watching Miami of Ohio in the MAC tournament, if particularly if Miami wins out. I'm watching that tournament to see if something happens. I'm watching the Mountain West to see if somebody, can wrap up either a
Nevada
3rd
might be
bid
in.
or something out of there. Um, Probably watching the West Coast to see, because if Santa Clara gets hot, they could they beat St. Mary's again,
Yeah,
and, that looks even better on their resume as to stay
yeah.
in. So those are all the kinds of things, to watch, and
I
then
it's as you know, it's gonna be highly improbable, okay? But there's not a lot of depth in the Big East. So if somebody would get upset early on, Providence, for instance, playing really well right now, and DePaul is too. They went in and knocked off in the first round, knocked off St. John's and UConn, then something could open up there, that
yeah,
because just
absolutely. So
because there's
we
not a lot of depth in these other conferences, the ACC's putting in 9, 10, the SEC's got 11, the Big Ten's got 10. There's not going to be even an upset. Still, that team would already been in anyway.
Yeah. No, I mean, and if you look at just the way it's gone, I mean, it's hard for me to see Duke losing in the ACC tournament
Yeah,
between here and
right.
the rest of the year. They've just been so much better than everybody else. Um,
Okay, real quick, and we'll flip off the bubble, and then we're done. What happens if Michigan goes out early? Duke wins the ACC. Do you think they're one overall? With the injury now we got an injury we gotta look at.
yeah, I mean, to me, Duke, Michigan, and Arizona are going to be 1 seeds at this point. Now, if Michigan,
I'm saying just one overall.
Yeah, I think Michigan, since Duke has the head-to-head, I think I think Michigan's gonna probably have to they can't lose probably more than 1 game between here and the rest of the way out and still have a chance to beat Duke if you can think that Duke's probably not gonna lose.
They've gotta show they can win without
Yeah,
Kaysen. They gotta show they can do that.
right.
Just as Texas Tech has shown they can win without Toppin, you know?
But I don't know that with the depth of the Michigan team and how they're put together, as much as you miss any component that plays regularly, um, I you know, we'll have to see. I don't think there's like some automatic caveat that will now Michigan, unless we see them become a drastically different team. I don't think, oh well, we need to drop Michigan a
Right.
seed line because they're missing one of their
Yeah.
players.
No, I'm not saying drop Masila, I'm just saying switch them with Duke,
Yes, I mean,
you know? Yeah.
I think they're more likely to end up potentially in that situation, the 3 or possibly the 4 at the worst. Um, I'm more interested actually, to be honest with you, Tim, obviously depending on how Michigan finishes, is what's the committee going to do if Florida wins out and rolls through the SEC tournament and is both the regular and conference tournament champion of the SEC, which is not what it was last year by any stretch of the imagination, but
Yeah.
a significantly more deep conference than the Big East. It's
You want an answer?
particularly
Where
if
they are
UConn
Friday
loses
morning
early.
is where they're gonna end up.
But I'm just saying, like, if UConn were to lose early in the Big East tournament, I think there's a possibility that Florida's numbers overall would just overwhelm them and they could still be the final number 1 seed.
Yeah. Yeah. We don't, and obviously nothing last year counts, but in human beings, there's that thing in their brain a little bit like, well, this is a defending champion. You know what I mean? Like, you know, it just is.
And the bottom line is there's outside of Duke and maybe Michigan, there's nobody playing better than Florida right now.
No, no, no.
No, we know
All
the
right.
old proverbial eye test, but
This was awesome. Thanks, Dave. And before we leave, I don't want you to answer this. This is something only bracketologists would think about. Okay? I don't want you to answer this. Just put this in your cap and think about it a while. Let's say Duke does pass Michigan. Would they then say, well, Michigan wants to go to Philly, even though Buffalo's way closer? What would they do? Interesting. All right. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoy it. And like I said, we'll have 1 or 2 more here because luckily when we're knocking out those brackets next week, they're not going to, other than adding the AQs and some of them, really not much is going to change. So it'll take us a little less time. So we'll have a little more time to do some stuff like this, which is great. All right. Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it.
all right. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, everybody.